My name is Rachel Worley. I am a little person, and I am one of the directors of the Mascots Matter campaign, bringing awareness to the 5 high schools in the United States with midget mascot. Now, I say the word midget in this context, just for clarity. That's a slur. In my daily conversations, I don't use that term because it's very offensive to little people. It dates back to the freak show era, where little people were othered, and I mean, we're still othered, but just kind of things and possessions of entertainment on sideshows, such as like with P.T. Barnum. Some issues we've run into as we've been advocating and meeting with these schools. First of all, they're very resistant. Only one of the schools has ever made themselves available to talk to us. The other 4, we've had to like weasel our way into talking to them, usually through like a Freedom of Information Act request, because then they're obligated to respond to those. But even still, we've been met with silence. But one of these schools had some students online who were defending their mascot and making comments like, somebody said like, oh, that's not even a good mascot. And they were like, well, I don't know about you, but I'm scared of midgets. And another student said like, how are we offending midgets? All in efforts to try and defend their mascot. But what's troubling about that is they're referring to my disability group as midgets, not their mascot. And this has created a situation where these schools, by having this mascot, I feel they're unable to teach about inclusion or disability awareness, or that you don't call little people midgets. Because I think that would put the school in a bad situation where then the students ask, well, why don't we call little people midgets? Oh, it's offensive. Then why do we have a mascot that's a midget? And so I don't believe these students are bad students. I believe they've been failed by their school, by their administrators. They have these shirts, midget pride and everything, that they can't even wear out of town. And that's not my words. Those are, alumni that end up, getting older, leaving, getting some world experience and empathy and inclusion, and are like, no, you can't wear your school pride anywhere because it's very offensive, not just like in case you run into a little person, but most of the United States knows that's an offensive term. And so it's just very untenable. It really feels so weird to be talking to administration about this when like they're a government organization. The laws that protect people from discrimination are so much clearer, with government organizations. And yet we're still ignored. And, being a little person just existing, like going to work, you don't know if somebody's going to take a picture of you and make you a meme that day. I've seen those memes online. And the same is true of just being a little person showing up to advocate for a school to change its mascot. It's funny to some of these communities. It's really funny. And they make jokes about, well, what would you rather be? Like, do you want to be us to be called the little people? Little people is going to be offensive. No, I don't want, it's not appropriate to be any minority or marginalized group. Like, that's inappropriate for a mascot because it creates all these situations that the school can't control. The school is undermined by this mascot in providing a safe and inclusive environment for people with disabilities. And it's not a matter of like if they'll ever have a student who's a little person, it's when. Like 1 in every like 20,000 births, I think, people, are little people. I come from an average height parents or average height family. Like nobody in my family has dwarfism or carries the gene. Like we're everywhere. And these schools go and play other schools where little people might be present. And they sing fight songs about the midgets. And it's just so strange. It's so strange. And then there's been some things that we've uncovered recently about the real harm that this has caused little people that we can see. This is alleged right now. But in Freeburg, Illinois, In 2015, the Little People of America, I believe President Gary Arnold, presented a letter to Freeburg, the Freeburg superintendent, and said, hey, we would love to meet with you. We're having a Little People of America conference in a nearby, in St. Louis nearby, and would present you with this petition to retire your mascot. The LPA wasn't threatening any legal action at all. And the superintendent, and I know this through emails because I submitted a FOIA request. The superintendent forwarded this to members of the administration. And what's interesting is, to the school board members, the email was sent to their school email and to their personal email. And nobody else, though. They didn't do that for the principal or the assistant principal. And then at their school board meeting in June 18th, it's just briefly mentioned under the superintendent's report that there's, the Little People of America presented a letter, and it shows that there's no record of it going into conversation at all, because if it had, it would have been on the minutes. So the media starts picking up this story, and I think that Freeburg's getting kind of nervous. I can read it kind of in the emails. They were pretty nervous about it, but the community of Freeburg was wanting to show their support for the mascot and defend it. And so they had like some, I don't know if I call it a rally or something, like some get-togethers, and selling shirts to like save the midget. And community members nearby who are little people also wanted to come and share their stories of why this mascot wasn't appropriate. So on July 16th, 2015, about 500 plus community members in support of the mascot came to the school board meeting, and I would guess maybe about half a dozen little people came. Now, there were some members of the community who did support changing the mascot. Not many, though. And at this meeting, on the microphone, people were making jokes that were very inappropriate. Like, what's the difference between Pluto and a midget? And it said, like, Pluto's a dwarf planet. And the audience of 500 people just roared into laughter. And listening to that, because I've listened to the audio of that meeting, just broke my heart. Can you imagine for a second, like, being a little person who you're othered every day? People laugh at you all the time and take your picture. You're not famous. You're just a little person who deals with like depression, who worries about finances, who hopes you get a promotion at work, who wonders what you're going to make for dinner that night, who like just has such a mundane life like everyone else, but the whole world sees you as humorous, entertaining, and something to mock. And to be in a room full of over 500 people mocking you and laughing and taunting. I've spoken to little people who went to that board meeting, and it was traumatizing for them. And they don't have to explain that to me. I can imagine that. But here's where it gets even more upsetting. And here's where I got to be clear, this is alleged for now. After all those horrible things being said, the board president, Dean Gouch, who's still on the school board today, gets up and says, the school board discussed this last month, and we have decided to take no action and have no plans to change the mascot. And the audience roars into cheers. There's some interviews of the little people afterwards, and one of them says this was the worst day of my life, which it would be mine too. Or one of the hardest days of my life. The problem is there's no record of the school board ever having a discussion about the mascot. I looked at the minutes. There was no discussion of that. I looked through all the emails. hundreds of emails that I was provided through my FOIA request from the school board members, administrators, and there's no record of this conversation happening ever. So there is some things, like there's this assistant principal that said, like, I'm so confused because, in an email after a school board meeting to the superintendent, she says, like, I'm paraphrasing, I'm just confused. I don't remember the board having this discussion. And so I go back to how the emails were sent to the school board's school email and their personal email. And that kind of leaves room for they likely had these conversations off record, which is like illegal. And I think they did that because they were scared of being on record for the ableist things they would say. And I mean, like, what if they had gone on record? They could have kept their mascot still. They'd still vote to keep their mascot. But they're cowards. They didn't want to be on record. They didn't want the world knowing how they felt about their mascot. They didn't want to be made fun of. They didn't want to be made fun of. They didn't want to be made fun of. And so these little people who showed up at this meeting thinking they had a shot to enter their, like, voice into this debate that was, I think, already decided before it was even introduced in June. The first email they received, I believe, was June 2nd. The school subjected little people to harm because they didn't want to be on the record. And that's something I've reported, and like the PAC is going to look at. And that's where it's alleged. We'll see what the PAC, if they see what I'm seeing as well. I can't imagine them not, but that has been really hard for me for the last few days to just process, to just think about. Community members have made comments of like, oh, they tried in 2015. It's not going to happen. And I feel like pity, and I feel bad for even the community members who support the mascot because they were misled by their school board members. Their school board members cheated. It's not even a fair fight. But it's just emboldened this community to say things. How are we offending midgets? I'm scared of midgets. Leave us alone. You don't live here. What are you going to do about it? Like, it's just, we've been taunted because the school board didn't want to be on record. They didn't want, like, the national news to have record of them defending the mascot. So they lied. They had a closed meeting with no record of it. So when somebody, whether it's this school Freeburg, or even there's other schools that didn't do that, but when they ask, like, but we mean this with pride, we're proud of this mascot, it's untenable. You can't keep the mascot and have an inclusive environment.